So in keeping with the sort of festive spirit of the time of the year, it gives us the opportunity to do some special things that we don't normally do. And I guess special requests to know how I became a monk and that sort of thing sort of fits in quite nicely. So it's mostly thanks to Richard, who I guess has delayed going to Thailand, especially to hear the results of this request. It's not normally a subject I would choose of my own accord. And one reason is that doing this sort of thing makes you suddenly feel old when you start sort of reminiscing about your life and sort of telling people about it. It starts to make you feel as if like you're nearing the end of it. Anyway, I should try to justify this in terms of something to do with Dhamma anyway, so that you have something to take away with it apart from just curiosity satisfied. So I'll start by telling not really the story of my life, but something which is a precursor to that, and something which I'm quite fortunate to be able to tell you about, mostly because of a thing I once did, which was to send all my questions and life story off to a Buddhist teacher in Thailand, who was able to maybe answer some questions about why I felt such an affinity for Thailand. And the story starts really with something which happened a long, long time ago, when there was a group of people in a certain kingdom, this is maybe many thousands of years ago, and the kingdom was governed by quite a virtuous king. And at some stage the king decided that he was going to renounce the world and become a monk and practice meditation for the rest of his life. And at the same time a lot of his followers, whether they were courtiers or members of his army or whatever, decided to do the same thing. And amongst those was a certain soldier who decided to become a monk along with the rest of the royal entourage. And to cut a long story short, this particular one enjoyed teaching so much that he wanted to have a role in teaching about Buddhism all around the world. Why this should be, we'll talk about later, but it's a little bit of background which comes sort of like the prequel to the story I'm going to tell you today. And given that, in order to spread teachings about meditation and Buddhism around the world, you have to actually be able to talk to them in a language other than your own. A very good shortcut, and you might want to try it for yourself if ever you have problems with languages, is you get yourself born as a person who speaks that language. So, in order to become a monk, to be able to speak in that language, then you have to invest a little and get yourself born to parents who are native speakers of that language. And my own story, or my parents' story, is that although they are English, but the time they met in Singapore in the 60s, when they were sort of handing independence back to that part of the country, Malaysia, Singapore. And on their honeymoon, they went to Thailand. And you all know what tends to happen on honeymoons. You tend to conceive your children, to cut a long story short. And yes, out of that came one certain Mr. Nicholas, a young boy. I have a history that goes back further than I've got photographs of, I'm afraid, because a few of my photo albums have sort of disappeared without trace. But to cut a long story short, I used to study psychology. And the reason I studied psychology, I think, was because I had an interest in learning more about the mind. But having studied it, I found I was quite disappointed by what Westerners had made of the mind. In those days, psychology was all about things like rat experiments and comparing the brain to a computer and that sort of thing, which is fairly unexciting, I would say. These days, psychology has become a lot more interesting, I'm glad to say. But at that time, I felt disappointed, and I felt that what I really wanted to learn about the mind might be learned more easily by learning about meditation. So as I was at Manchester University, I started to attend the Buddhist Society, not really because I was interested in Buddhism, but because they taught meditation for free. And the free bit is generally quite interesting for students. And one thing led to another. I became very interested in other things to do with Buddhism apart from meditation. And as a result of the Buddhist Society and organizing talks for them eventually, I got to know a lot of speakers, some of whom came from Thailand, one of whom actually invited me to Thailand. And at first I didn't take it very seriously, but later on I did teaching practice and I started to get the taste of what working life is really like. It sort of drives you up the wall, basically. And given the choice between going to Thailand and pursuing my dream with meditation and hanging around in England and being pestered by small children for a living, the choice was quite clear to me. I had a sort of inner feeling that this was the right choice. So the next slide shows my poor parents, together with one of my friends, having to take back my worldly possessions because those were the things that I was not taking to Thailand with me. Parents thought I was probably mad. And I had a sort of backup to my plan, which was teaching English in Thailand if things didn't work out. But I did spend 2 weeks, first of all, practicing meditation in the main temple in Thailand. And in those days, the abbot actually used to come and teach the meditation retreats himself. And I was fortunate to be in that class for the first 2 weeks. You can imagine a poor Westerner sitting on the floor with very inflexible legs. We all start the same way. And for me, the first 3 years were extremely painful. And little by little, I got into the temple life. I became even a feature of the temple. They asked me to give talks. I could hardly talk at all. And that first experience made me want to learn Thai. And eventually, by that time, the monk who had actually invited me to come to Thailand in the first place returned. He found lots of interesting things for me to help with around the temple, getting used to life in various forms at the temple, helping out, practicing generosity in a way that was not possible in England, with the monks going on arms round and that sort of thing. Having the chance to release fish, offer robes, eventually even donate blood. My parents came to check me out to see if I'd been brainwashed. It seemed that I was happy enough, so they left sort of some way contented with that. And more chance for meditation, little by little, even in the hills of Chiang Mai and Pukuding in those days as well. I helped with the work of translation, publications as well. You can see from the age of the Macintoshes that it was quite a long time ago. This is going back to the 80s, 90s. Collector's items now mostly made into fish tanks. We organized the conference called Buddhism into the Year 2000. And I did proceedings for that. Met the previous Supreme Patriarch when he was alive and well. That's the Vice Abbot, whose birthday it is today, 73 years now. In those days he was only in his 50s. Takpat table, Thai people know all about this. I got to be an angel. I started to work with the international department. In those days, there wasn't an international department. We got sent to Japan. I worked with the Work Fellowship of Buddhists, organizing the conferences for them, amongst other things. I learned Thai, not just like to get by. I even went on a public speaking course and beat all the Thais at it in Thai. Maybe I was it may have been favoritism. And then eventually the question came after 9 years of being in the temple, would this year be the year I would like to be a monk? There being two ways of becoming a monk in our temple. One way is just like to join the temple and be one, without anyone inviting you to do so. The other way is to serve the monks until they eventually ask you, are you ready to be a monk this year? And generally, if you follow that route, then the moment you ordain, then you are already teaching. But if you ordain immediately, you join the temple, then you have to sort of work your way up through the ranks, as it were. So the reason why this question came was because the temple was starting to work more internationally. And they'd actually been offered the opportunity to set up a center in Europe for the first time, teaching not Thai people abroad, but Westerners directly. And this was in Belgium, of all places. Now, I'd never been to Belgium, but they hadn't got a monk who could speak English to support this project. So they thought, well, the easiest way to get a monk is to take the lay people who we have, who's a foreigner, to be a monk this year. So I got to be go for the ordination. This is in 1997. That's presentation for ordination. Kunyai was still alive, fortunately, when I was going for the ordination. She helped clip my hair. The parents came back. They trying to look happy there. I don't think they were particularly happy. They led the procession, the robes and bowl. If your parents don't let you ordain, you can't ordain. So I am quite lucky in some instances. They may have reluctantly allowed me to become a monk, but they did allow me to become a monk. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And ordained with the other monk, Lumpi Satapon, who runs the main retreat center in Panawat these days. So, young and slim. And I got sent to Belgium to establish the first center in Europe. This is 7th of November 1997, Meditation for Beginners. This was the revolutionary new way of converting the whole of the Western world to meditation. Well, it was a good idea, and really still we are using the fruits of this today. We went with a group of 10 people, 2 monks, 4 lay men, 4 lay women, all of whom were very experienced in organizing retreats and so on, to the center of the universe in Europe, which was a small village called Ypres, or Wipers, depending on how you want to pronounce it. You may know it from its fame in the First World War, having been flattened by the trench warfare, etc., along with Passchendaele and all those other places. So it's a good place for peace in the world. Unfortunately, it's like really in the sticks, and the sort of impact of this huge sort of outpouring of energy from the main center in Thailand was not really quite as fruitful as it might have been, but it was a start. We did rent out a hotel, and we used to organize meditation. Fortunately, Belgians mostly speak English, otherwise it would have been even harder. And yes, it was well attended. And then we had a little bit of an obstacle, which was out of the group of 10 people, 9 of them could not extend their visa to stay there any longer after 3 months. So they said, well, you want to come with us or you want to stay? I thought, well, after all the effort our abbot has put into establishing this pioneering sort of effort to spread meditation to all these Westerners, if I go back to it, it's finished, So they said, okay, so you're not going. So they left me, I think it was about £2,000, and they took all the furniture and went off first to France and then back to Thailand, and left me there with no support or anything. And we couldn't stay in the old house. I had to rent out a new one, so I got this little apartment. And I just carried on with the rest of the course. And I told the people on the course, if you've enjoyed what you have followed so far, for next week, you're going to be the organizers. And a lot of them were actually chipped in, and we managed to finish that course ultimately as well. And some of you might recognize there even Lumpy Sander. Sometimes he comes here to teach as well. He was one of the group who actually traveled all the way from Holland in order to join the courses in those days. So there is a sort of point to organizing it, some plan there on a more cosmic level for why it had to be in a Dutch-speaking country, etc. And yes, little by little, that was the first almsgiving of the Belgian people, which shows that even a monk can survive in such a place. You may be able to teach meditation, but you can't stay if no one gives you any food, right? So this happened, and even I really was supported by the generosity of the Belgian people in those times, because there weren't any Thai people. I think there were 3 actually in that village, and only 2 of them ever came to the temple. And yes, organizing retreats, New Year retreat, top of a mountain in Belgium. You didn't know Belgium had mountains, did you? Retreats. This is me learning Dutch. By the end of my stay in Belgium, I actually could teach meditation in Dutch as well, and French. And eventually, I started to teach in Switzerland. That was the starting point of what would go on to be a center in Switzerland. Eventually we moved to a place where the support was a little bit more substantial, back in one of the cities in Belgium. This is Antwerp. We started in an apartment above a printer's, but the support was much stronger. And when I was able to come back to Thailand, I tried to help contribute to the activities which maybe would train up the sort of people who could come back and help expand the work. In those days it was called the Inner Peace Pioneers. Since then they keep changing the name, but you probably see many reincarnations of the same sort of things to get young people to meditate and so on. Again, Rumpi Sanda actually came to Thailand for the first time as part of that. I trained up the translators. This is a translation course for budding translators on DMC, to translate books or to translate like a conference translator for the DMC transmissions. Like you can sometimes find it on the second language channel there. Teach English for the staff. Yes. This was when Kunya had passed away, giving a sermon at her funeral. And other things I've done in Thailand are things like helping in the south of Thailand. This is in Yala. And helping in India with a big ceremony there. This is training up monks in Thailand, the International Dhammakaya. This is actually the first group before they started counting. I think they're up to about the 15th year probably now, but this was the one before they started counting. Been to the United Nations, given a translation and a talk there in Geneva with the Vice Abbot. And my first real foothold in England was coming to Manchester when that was established, in a curtain rail factory. That was in the days when we had giving up smoking and drinking ceremonies. Ever had one of them here? Nah, you're too recent for this sort of thing. We used to have, this is a big cigarette, because like small ones, they don't show up very well in photographs, so you have to have like really big ones. Yes, you burn them up and pour away your alcohol and smash all the bottles in sacks. Yeah, oh, you're too young to know about all these things. But yes, these were the days. And in the present day, although I have spent some time here, probably 3 or 4 years, actually based in London, I am back now in Manchester again. I still have to look after building work, and it sort of continues the building. It's gone up a bit more since I last looked. I also help in Ireland, working with the local liaison, doing what I think Dai Pacharin does here, is teaching in an Irish language school in Ireland, teaching in Switzerland, teaching in Manchester, in Ireland, here. Georgia, I go once a year until they get fed up with me. A very strong group there. And I also am a researcher on young Buddhist teenagers' values. So I make the rounds of all the temples, Sri Lankan, Burmese and Thai in the country, trying to get the participation of their young upcoming Buddhists from the temples there. And I work a little bit in the academic field. Most recent presentations I've made have been in Finland, on what makes you not a Buddhist, something about Buddhist identity, about values, in a conference in Wales, and in Iceland most recently about temple-going teens. And been able to publish some papers as a result of those as well in peer-reviewed publications. So, do you think the dream has come true? Am I following the original pathway? Am I living up to my destiny? Well, some people say, well, how come someone would have made a wish like this in the first place? And the explanation I have been given from the teacher is that it's not the first lifetime that I've been a monk. And there was a certain lifetime, maybe a lifetime before, when I was a monk who did a lot of teaching also, but it was always teaching in the temple. And when all the other monks came back from giving exciting talks in different places around the world and meeting new things and having their journeys and telling about all the exciting things that happened outside the temple, I felt this is frustrating that all the teaching I did happened to be for the staff in the temple and this sort of thing. So I made a wish that let this be the last lifetime that I am restricted to the temple in my teaching activities, and from now on may I be able to teach in many places around the world. So this has, to some extent, started to come true more. This time I've visited a total of, I think, last count, 44 countries, and most of those have not been for fun, have been for teaching engagements of various sorts. So to leave you with some sort of semblance of a takeaway from these activities of my life story, I think some of the things which have occurred to me is making a resolution or a wish on the basis of the good things which you do in your life is actually quite an powerful influence on your own destiny. I don't know if this is something you've ever really thought about too much. You know, sometimes you offer some food in the temple or a donation in the temple, and they always say, make a wish, make a wish. And you might think, well, it's just like a traditional thing that you do. But actually, what you wish for tends to be exactly what happens. So if you understand the power of making a strong intention in such a way, it can actually have quite a strong influence on the way your life goes from that time onwards. And from my own experience, a lot of things which I would have otherwise found it quite hard to explain, things like even from when I was quite young, not really wanting to go down the pathway of all my friends, of quite a lot of indulgence in drugs and alcohol and so on, just feeling, no, this is not for me. Where does that sort of intuition come from? If it's not from something that you've laid down from a long distance past. If it hasn't come from some sort of intention at some stage. Because the odds are that you just follow what your friends do. And if you have a strong sort of stance on a certain something, this is often because of the result of things which you have, set up, wished for in the past. That's what it appears to me anyway. Another thing which becomes quite obvious when you look back through old photographs is you might think it's fairly simple, and often for yourself, following a pathway of being in the temple, helping out with work, do it continuously, almost habitually even, almost feeling it's part of your duty, it's something that's your life. And you find that many of the people who have been with you along the way actually fall by the wayside. And it's only when that starts to happen you realize what you have is actually quite special. A lot of people give up for reasons which are not really very substantial at all, and they go off and have, they just give up the training completely. And this is particularly the case where the sort of people who encourage you to do the thing in the first place actually are the ones to give up the training. And this has actually happened to me in the case of the monk who actually got me to go to Thailand in the first place, actually later left the rope, left the temple. It's something you would never dream would happen. And yet you find, here you are, it's almost like you're the replacement, look, the people who you think you used to look up to, actually you're at the front of the row now, and everyone's looking up to you instead. It's sometimes quite a sobering realization that, you've succeeded in pulling through where others haven't. And often you may think, well, Thai people are born with Buddhism and they're bound to have a deeper, more substantial faith. But it's not always the case. It's not what it depends on at all. It's down to basically your sense of consistency in the things that you do. So if you find people around you are falling by the wayside, then, don't let that get to you, and it's a reflection on your own sort of steadfastness that you are carrying on regardless. You'll see that our organization has not always been international. There was not really a foreign language spoken in the place where I first arrived there. And this has come during the time I've been there. Not saying it's come because of me, but this has really just happened in the last 20 years or so for the organization. And it's really something which I've had parts in all the way through the internationalization of the organization. I hope it will happen more and more. I think it's bound to happen. And hopefully you can take away from my embarrassing task of sharing my past with you. Maybe you can see something of the things of your own, maybe in a slightly better light, that we all have to start somewhere. And but from that we grow to something much stronger, and hopefully it's something that you will keep with you as well. And that you are not alone in the way that you sort of build on your experience of meditation, of practicing Buddhism, to a point where one day you actually find that people are asking your advice on these sorts of things. Yeah? Anyone like to ask anything? Any crucial thing I've missed out here? Yes, go on. Yes, I think so. No, I don't want a Mancunian accent. I acquire accents I like. And one thing which I tend to do is I pick up accents in the places I go to. But generally in the places where I like the accent, I will take some of that on board. I'm not saying I like a Belgian accent very much. I think that's part and parcel of learning another language. It just ruins your accent, but maybe it wasn't so good in the beginning. But I was brought up in Scotland. I've not got Scottish blood, but it does brush off. I feel quite at home in Scotland still. And I do visit Ireland, so that sort of requires some of that too. A little bit of Celtic here and there. Debbie. Well, when you become a monk, one of the duties of your preceptor is to give you an appropriate name. Unfortunately, there are only about 300 odd names they can give you. So after the first few hundred monks, then it starts to repeat itself. Some preceptors use the principle of basing it on the day of birth of that person. So a certain initial would be for a certain day of the week. Other preceptors take the meaning of your surname and they translate that into a Pali word. Some even ask you, do you want this name? I had a choice of two. At the time I wasn't aware that there's another very famous Thannissaro, which later I felt that's a bit of a shame, because to get mixed up with another, when that name is, everyone thinks immediately of another quite famous writer who's called actually Geoffrey de Graaf, who's an American who also ordained in the Thai forest tradition, but now lives in California. He's written a lot of books and translations. So I'm very much in his shadow by using this name. So I have tended to call myself Ven.Nicholas instead of Thannissaro Bhikkhu to avoid the confusion. Yeah. But generally it's based on your qualities. And the qualities should be something which helps to inspire you somehow. My name means one who is great in either work or in wealth or in rank. Mostly it seems to be work. I seem to have a lot of work, yes. Oh, I'm glad someone thinks so. Not so far, no. I think there's just so much more to do to bring it to a point where it will take care of itself and you can sort of go off and die and it will sort of carry on by itself. I think it really hasn't got to that point yet. And as you can probably guess, I have a lot of involvement with bringing meditation and Buddhism out of countries where that's the dominant culture. And I really don't feel it has got itself to a point where it's self-perpetuating. I fear very strongly that the people who learn perhaps from me will just sort of die with the knowledge and not be knowledgeable enough or inspired enough to pass that on to others. And if that's the case, then it's really, you're counting the days to the point where no one knows about this anymore, and it's all, it goes back to what it was before. It's receded back to Thailand or whatever. So it's quite it's like there's a lot more work to be done.
So is the answer to English is spoken, most of all, English and Spanish, is the answer really to be concentrating on areas where there's a wider language?
I would think so. And it's not just the language, it's also the culture. To embed it in that culture in a way that the culture sees it as being part of it, in a way that maybe you can't separate the two anymore. And the moment it's just I would say, an accretion to the culture. It's not really part of the culture. You won't, have British people feeling that meditation is ours, yet, or it's, this is something I must teach my children. I think the people with that sort of burning desire are probably fairly few and far between, but it needs to be the case if it's really to take root and to flourish. Otherwise, it's just like, a foreign plant in one of these hot houses in Kew Gardens or something, where, yes, it's in Britain, but anyone turns the heating off, it's finished, There's even a monk from Woking, but he's gone off meditating, he hasn't come back, in Thailand. So the sort of inclination to teach is also another quality which not all monks have. I reckon in Dhammakaya in Thailand now there are probably about 20 Westerners who are monks. It's not a great number. Generally, they must stay there for at least 5 years training before they are allowed to come back and start doing something for their own country. But, Belgium, there's one, Holland, the States. It's still not a very great number, though, I'm afraid. But hopefully there'll be enough. The trickle would just turn to a flow at some stage. That's the thing, isn't it? Well, from my point of view, even as a fairly skeptical person, it seemed to fit with things which I hadn't told him. So let's say I told him half the story and he filled in the rest for me, then that's fairly sort of convincing, right? You tell him, for example, I told him about my grandfather who'd passed away. And he gave a whole lot of details about what had happened to him when he died and why. And what I hadn't told him was that the grandfather had been a soldier and he'd obviously been at war and probably, killed quite a lot of people in the process. I hadn't told him that, but what he'd said about what he'd experienced when he passed away was that sort of the suffering from that, for example. So that helped to make it a little bit more plausible from my point of view. How did it affect me? I think it helped me feel that it was something which was more than the work of a single lifetime. You come back and you're doing more of the same sort of teaching work and so on. Maybe it's something you don't finish in a single lifetime and you have to come back and carry on. How did he know about this sort of thing? With meditation, what we've been doing today is really like what you might call practicing meditation. So it's, you practice, and one day you can actually do it. You have periods of calm in your meditation, times when all the thoughts are cleared from your mind, and at that point your mind becomes accessible to deeper sorts of thoughts or insight that come up. And if you're a very experienced meditator, sometimes those thoughts and insights are accurate enough that you can actually start to talk about things and describe things that go beyond your waking perceptions and experiences, which would go back to past memories, past lives, even past lives of other people, if your meditation is good enough. So for the teacher of the Dhammakaya tradition, for example, he's known to be quite a deep meditator, having been meditating for, getting on for 60 years or so, solidly, and being quite accomplished at that as well. There's a tradition of what's known as meditation research in the Dhammakaya tradition, and it's possible when a lot of people meditate together for their experiences to overlap in a way that gives you the solidity of the knowledge to actually see further than each individual person can do by themselves. And that's how they manage to do it, sort of by building up on their accumulation of meditative ability. So they have an institute as part of the temple in Thailand where that sort of high-level meditation goes on, and that's where answers to things like these, what are known as case studies, are supposed to come from.
So basically, it's like tapping into some collective.
Yes, something like that. It's in each person too, but it's like it's like having a hard disk. You can't manage to salvage the data on it, but the data is still there somewhere. It's just a question of, clicking it into place somehow. It's there, but it's not accessible even to the person who owns it. You need to use a more subtle method to get at that information. Because it's said that all our experiences are recorded in our awareness somewhere. It's just that we don't have very good memories. But it's still there. It's just that we can't get at it. That's how it tends to be. So if your mind becomes more subtle, then you can get back to those memories again.
So have you experienced this?
Sorry?
Have you experienced this?
Not myself, no. But I think I have had insights in meditation which have changed the way I've looked at life in quite a radical way, but not with the sort of detail that I could put names and places to things that have happened, not just to oneself, but to other people as well. That is really quite outstanding. It's very rarely that you'd find someone with that sort of ability. You mean in going back through your memories?
To my understanding, Buddhist is to achieve ultimate enlightenment.
Yes.
So what happens then to the body, like in Christianity, you live eternal life?
Well, a person's made up of body and spirit, and rebirth tends to be about how the spirit part comes back and takes new life with a new body. And this goes on until all the impurities in the mind have, by the person's good deeds, been overcome. At which point, because it's the impurities that draw a person back into life, if there are no more to do that, then whatever that person is, now a very pure entity of some sort, will no longer be reborn. But it sort of has a place where it goes, and that place is called nirvana.
Would that be similar to our
Yes, you would be there eternally. But in Buddhism, there's also heavens, but they are more like temporary, holding areas between lifetimes. So Buddhists wouldn't call it heaven, because they say that the heaven which most people describe in other religions is more like a temporary stage in after, between lifetimes. Well, it is a place which is full of enlightened minds. You could say that those beings still exist in some senses. In some senses they don't exist, because all the impure parts of them are no longer with them anymore. So what you have is the seed of enlightenment of all those beings accumulated together in one place. So it's a place, but it's a place outside the reach of the cycle of rebirth. So it's... Oh yes, there's consciousness, for sure. Yes, you would be in a state of, well, you would have nothing but enlightenment as yourself. You are unified, I guess, with enlightenment. It's not very easy to get your head round in a sort of conventional sense, and often the Buddha didn't refuse to go into too much detail because it's misleading, because you tend to say, well, if it's not that, it must be this then, but it's like, might not be either of them. But the important thing is that you're out of the suffering of constantly being born and dying in this cycle of rebirth, which is the sort of the motivating factor in trying to get there. Yeah. Anyway, we have one final duty for the year, which is something to do with a lucky dip. I'm not quite sure how this is going to happen. I think someone told me it's a foregone conclusion. But I'm waiting for details. Oh. Apparently, the number of people who have entered for the lucky draw is equal to the number of prizes. So it's extremely lucky for the people, and the prize which we have is the opportunity, free of charge, to join